Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got quite a mission ahead of us. We're diving deep into this incredible mix of sources.
We really are.
Yeah, everything from, ancient philosophy, Greek thinkers, Eastern strategists.
All the way to modern business texts, military strategy, even spiritual writings. It's quite the stack.
Exactly. And we're trying to pull out the core principles. What does it take to lead, to be resilient, to make decisions when, frankly, a system's survival is on the line?
That's the crux of it. It's fascinating how these diverse sources, they kind of converge on that single critical question. What qualities does a leader absolutely need to hold on to authority and purpose when things get overwhelmingly complex, when crisis hits?
Right. It seems to be this blend of external strategy, the smart moves, but also that internal strength, fortitude.
Yeah, absolutely. That internal discipline is often the linchpin. You can have the perfect plan, but if the outer cracks under pressure, well,
The whole thing falls apart. So our goal here is to give you, the learner, a kind of structured understanding. What do these sources say about authority, about strategic flexibility, and that inner discipline you need to navigate? What did Grove call it? A strategic inflection point.
that's the term. Those moments of profound disruptive change. So where do we start? With the foundations, I suppose.
Makes sense. Let's lay the groundwork. Okay, so the nature of rule itself. We pretty much have to start with Aristotle, right? He gave us that initial framework.
He really did. The classic categorization, rule by one, by the few, or by the many.
Monarchy, aristocracy, polity, or democracy. The
Well,
basics.
But Aristotle, he goes deeper than just counting heads. He points out that the difference in wealth is often more fundamental.
Oh, right. Oligarchy isn't just rule by the few, it's rule by the wealthy few.
Exactly. And democracy, in his view, often meant rule by the poor many. The numbers usually line up with the economics, but the core difference he saw was class.
And maybe his most lasting idea here is that distinction between correct and deviant forms of rule.
Yes, that's crucial. It shifts everything from just structure to, well, ethics. It's not just how you govern, but why.
So explain that. Correct versus deviant.
Okay, so rule by one, if it's for the common good, that's kingship. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
But if that single ruler governs only for their own benefit, their own pleasure, that's tyranny. Deviant.
Got it.
Rule by the few, if they're aiming for the good of everyone, that's aristocracy, correct.
Right.
But if they're just using their position to enrich themselves, that's oligarchy, deviant.
And the many.
If the many rule for the collective benefit, that's what he called a polity, correct. But if they rule only for the narrow self-interest of the majority, particularly the poor majority against the rich, that becomes democracy in his negative sense.
Deviant.
It really frames the purpose of government, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What is the state actually for? Rousseau picked up on this using the family model.
Right. The family is the sort of prime model for political society. The father is the ruler, the children are the people.
And the father cares for the children. Initially, yes. The father's authority, it's based on nature, and it's repaid by his love, his duty. But Rousseau throws in a huge warning sign.
Which is?
When you scale that up to the state, the ruler's motivation changes completely. It stops being about love or duty. It becomes about the sheer pleasure of being in charge.
Power for its own sake.
Exactly. That's the psychological shift. That's what turns a potential kingship into a tyranny. The love is gone, replaced by the enjoyment of command.
And speaking of the ideal, Aristotle had some pretty specific ideas about who should even be a citizen in his best city-state.
Oh, definitely. He's quite explicit. Citizens in the finest city-state shouldn't live the life of a, quote, vulgar craftsman or tradesman.
Which sounds incredibly elitist to modern ears.
It does, but his reasoning wasn't just snobbery. It was practical from his perspective. The highest goal for a citizen was virtue,
Okay.
and to develop virtue, and crucially, to engage in political life, the deliberative part, the decision-making. You needed leisure, free time.
So if you're working with your hands all day or constantly focused on commerce,
You simply don't have the time or perhaps the mental space required to cultivate that virtue, to think deeply about the state's affairs, to participate fully.
so for Aristotle, the best state needs
What?
a military class and a deliberative class.
Essentially, yes. Those who defend the state and those who guide it, who have the freedom, the leisure, to think and judge. It's a challenging idea, certainly, but it highlights this ancient argument that real leadership needs some distance from the daily grind.
Moral independence, maybe. But that ideal bumps up against the harsher realities of power pretty quickly. Let's talk Hobbes.
Hobbes, yes. A much colder view of things. He gives us this Terrifyingly clinical take on sovereign power.
His argument is that the subjects basically create the sovereign, right? They authorize the sovereign's actions.
Precisely. And that leads to this really stark conclusion. A sovereign, by definition, cannot commit an injustice against a subject.
Because the subject technically authorized whatever the sovereign does, so complaining is illogical.
That's the Hobbesian logic. You're complaining about actions you yourself authored through the social contract. It's a logical impossibility within his framework.
But he does offer a sort of moral escape hatch, doesn't he?
He does, thankfully. The sovereign can commit iniquity.
Iniquity. So a moral wrong, even if it's not technically an injustice within the legal system Hobbes describes.
Exactly. The act might be legally permissible because the sovereign has absolute authority, but it can still be profoundly wrong, ethically corrupt. It completely separates legality from morality.
Which shows that just because rule is established by law doesn't mean it's going to be just rule.
Not at all. And we see this play out. Think about someone like Robert Moses in 20th century New York.
The master builder.
Right, and the sources point out he made that exact transition Rousseau warned about. He started with dreams, big projects, but eventually he craved power, not only for the sake of dreams, but for its own sake.
He became the modern tyrant operating within the system.
Completely, using the levers of power, but for his own ends, committing what Hobbes would call iniquity.
And it wasn't just political power, was it? He used economic forces.
Absolutely. He weaponized economics to, as the source puts it, warp the city off its democratic bias. Public works decisions weren't based on what the people needed or wanted democratically.
They were based on what worked for his massive projects, his economic vision.
Driven by economic considerations, engineering feasibility, and, crucially, his own consolidation of power.
And that detail about the Parkway bridges, it's just astonishing.
The low clearance bridges on Long Island Parkway
Oh.
is such a clear, concrete example.
Built intentionally too low for city buses.
Exactly. A deliberate structural choice to keep poor people, largely minorities who relied on public transport, away from the beaches and parks he was building.
So he's using engineering specs, perfectly legal, to enforce social and racial segregation.
Textbook iniquity, hidden in plain sight within the law. Infrastructure as social control.
Which brings up the idea of consent versus just being there. Locke makes a distinction, right?
Yes, Locke is very clear on this. There's a difference between just living in a country, obeying its laws, and enjoying its protection, what he calls local protection.
Which is basically what any visitor or temporary resident does.
Right. You're just submitting to the rules while you're physically present. It's temporary, pragmatic.
But that doesn't make you a member of the society.
No. To become a real member, a true subject or citizen, Locke argues you need positive engagement and an express compact.
Meaning you have to actively sign up somehow. An oath, maybe?
Something like that.
Yeah.
An active commitment that binds you more fundamentally than just temporary obedience. It makes you truly part of the political body, accountable in a deeper way. This difference is really important for understanding where a leader's legitimate authority actually comes from.
Okay, so we have the external structures, legitimate authority, law, maybe even infrastructure. But what's holding it all together? It has to be the leader's character.
The character of the commander, absolutely. Let's jump back to the classics for a moment. Xenophon's account of Cyrus the Great's education.
What's the key lesson there?
Reasoned authority. Young Cyrus was explicitly trained by his master to always give a reason for his judgments.
Not just issue orders?
No. Explain why. And just as importantly, to expect and look for reasons from others. It establishes this standard. Leadership isn't just command, it's reasoned explanation. The commander needs the clarity to justify the course of action.
So those following understand the purpose.
Exactly. If the system is going to hold together under stress, the commander's actions need to make sense. They need to be legible.
That connects nicely with Emerson's idea of where real force comes from.
Emerson's gentleman. Not about social status, but about character.
A person of truth, lord of their own actions, independent.
Independent of external opinion, expressing that self-mastery in their behavior, he argues this personal force, this inner strength and integrity is still the most important source of authority, even in modern politics and business. Titles and positions are secondary.
And this internal force, it's not about being slick or charming, is it? Confucius warns against that.
Right. Confucius says it's rare for glib speech and an insinuating appearance to go along with true authoritative conduct, what he calls ren.
So the smooth talker is suspect.
Deeply suspect. Real authority comes from substance, from self-mastery. It requires honesty, first with oneself. The commanding leader avoids that trap of being merely persuasive on the surface.
Okay. So authority needs to be reasoned, internally grounded, sincere. That really sets the stage for the big test. What happens when crisis actually hits? Because when that strategic inflection point arrives, when the pressure is existential, command shifts, doesn't it? It moves from governing to something more like warfare.
It really does. And Clausewitz, famous for grand strategy, actually gives us some very pointed advice on what he called small war. Low-intensity conflict, guerrilla warfare, which can feel a lot like modern organizational chaos.
Right. So what are the principles there?
One of the most striking rules he lays out for defense sounds completely contradictory at first. He says, wherever possible, defend oneself offensively.
Defend offensively. How does that work?
It's about seizing the initiative, even when you're technically on the defensive. It means controlling the time and place of the engagement.
So not just sitting behind a wall waiting.
No. It's about luring the enemy into terrain, where you have the advantage, terrain you know well, maybe where you've prepared ambushes or traps.
Ah, okay. So you draw them onto your ground.
And then you attack them, ideally from multiple sides. You're defending your overall position, yes, but you're doing it through active, offensive counterattacks that leverage your local strengths. It requires foresight, preparation.
Not just reaction. And Clausewitz also spends a lot of time on the retreat.
He does. He argues the retreat deserves its own detailed study for 3 key reasons.
Okay, what are they?
1, it happens all the time in war. It's common. 2, it almost always has to be done under the absolute worst conditions: chaos, low morale, pressure.
And 3.
3, and this is the crucial point for leadership, it provides the single best opportunity for a commander to distinguish themselves.
More so than winning.
Often, yes. Executing a controlled, disciplined retreat, keeping the force together, fighting effectively while withdrawing, saving the core of your army. That requires extraordinary skill and composure.
It's a test of leadership under maximum duress.
The ultimate crucible. It tells you more about a commander's real quality than an easy victory might. Leadership shines brightest, not always in success, but in how you manage failure, how you control the chaos of withdrawal.
That resonates. Now, Sun Tzu also talks about control, specifically controlling the ground, avoiding battles you can't win.
Sun Tzu is relentless about preparation and positioning. He offers these very direct maxims about terrain.
Like what?
Like, you don't fight on dispersive ground where your troops can easily scatter or lose focus. You don't halt on facile ground, easy terrain where you might get complacent.
Okay.
And critically, you do not attack the enemy on contentious ground.
Contentious ground meaning?
Ground that offers a strong natural advantage, maybe a hilltop or a bottleneck that the enemy already holds. Attacking them there head on is just foolish. Unless you can use strategy, deception, maneuver to lure them away from that strong point first, then you can engage. It's all about flexibility, recognizing the reality of the situation, the terrain, whether that's a literal battlefield or a market landscape.
That need for flexibility, for recognizing when the whole landscape shifts, that leads us straight into modern disruption theory. Andy Grove at Intel.
Yes, Andy Grove gave us that incredibly useful term, strategic inflection point, an SIP.
And he defined it as a 10x change, right?
Exactly. Not your everyday 10% fluctuation. This is a change 10 times bigger. A fundamental shift, technology, competition, regulation that just completely rewrites the rules of the game.
He compared it to river rafting.
Yeah, hitting Class 6 rapids, the kind of violent, dangerous whitewater that will absolutely determine your future. You either navigate it successfully or you capsize and drown. Survival or collapse.
It sounds so dramatic, so sudden. But other sources offer a slightly different perspective, don't they? Like good to great.
That's a really important counterbalance. Collins and his team looked at companies that made huge, successful shifts. The example they often use is Kimberly-Clark.
Selling off their traditional paper mills, going all in on consumer brands like Kleenex, a massive pivot.
From the outside, it looked like a sudden, bold, almost instantaneous strategic decision. Revolutionary.
But that's not how the executives described it.
No, they described it as an organic, cumulative process. That big decision to sell the mills. They saw it as just one more giant push on the company's flywheel.
The flywheel, meaning?
Meaning they'd been building momentum in that direction for years, through thousands of small, consistent actions, decisions, hires, all pushing in the same strategic direction. It took years of those smaller pushes to get the flywheel spinning fast enough for that final big move to be possible.
So you need to recognize the 10x threat, the rapid.
Yes, absolutely recognize the SOP. But understand that the ability to navigate it often comes from years of sustained, consistent, often unglamorous, cumulative effort building that internal momentum.
And in today's world, what makes navigating these crises even harder is just the speed and interdependence.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
The military example from Team of Teams is so stark. Their traditional hierarchical structure,
Mm.
built for predictability,
It was just too slow.
too slow for modern adversaries. Because information spoils.
Intelligence spoils quickly. In counterinsurgency especially, you capture some data, a phone, a document. It might be actionable for hours, maybe minutes.
But the system couldn't process it fast enough.
The layers of command, the need for information to go up the chain, get analyzed by specialists far away, then back down. It created fatal delays.
And there was a trust issue, too.
A huge one. Operators on the ground often didn't know or trust the analysts back at headquarters, so they'd hold on to captured material trying to figure it out themselves, rather than passing it up immediately.
Which wasted precious time.
Critical time. By the time the intel finally got processed, the enemy had moved, the opportunity vanished. The efficient, reliable hierarchy became a bottleneck. The agile, networked enemy won the speed battle. So the crisis isn't just the external threat. It's the internal system failing to adapt, failing to trust itself to move fast enough.
That breakdown of trust, or the need for speed, it leads directly to this really tough ethical tightrope leaders have to walk. Expediency versus morality.
When survival seems to demand quick, maybe dirty decisions, do the ends justify the means? Cicero gives a pretty strong answer.
Uncompromising, really, coming from that Stoic and Aristotelian tradition. He argues flatly that expediency and immorality cannot coexist in the same action. They are mutually exclusive.
Why? Because wrongdoing is fundamentally unnatural.
More opposed to our essential nature than even death or pain, he argues. If virtue is the highest good, then what is truly right must also be what is truly expedient in the long run.
So the corrupt leader just doesn't see the bigger picture.
They see the short-term gain from the wrong action, but they fail to recognize the inherent punishment of the guilt, the damage to their own character, which Cicero sees as the greater harm.
There's that fantastic anecdote he uses to illustrate this, the story of Pythias the banker.
Yes, the Pythias fraud. It's
Well-
so detailed, it really brings the point home. This Roman knight, Catanius Canius, wants to buy a nice villa near Syracuse, mainly for the fishing.
Okay.
Pythias owns a villa Cananius likes, but it's not actually known for great fishing. But Pythias wants to sell it for a ridiculously high price.
So he sets up a scam.
A total setup. He invites Canius to dinner at the villa the next day.
Yeah.
But overnight, he secretly tells all the local fishermen to show up in front of his villa tomorrow morning, cast their nets, and pretend to be hauling in huge catches.
Creating a false impression.
Completely. Canius arrives, sees dozens of boats, fishermen bringing baskets overflowing with fish right up to Pythias' house.
Yeah.
He's absolutely convinced this is a fisherman's paradise.
And he buys it.
Instantly, inflamed with longing, as Cicero puts it, pays the exorbitant price Pythias demanded.
And the next day,
The next day, Canius moves in, ready to fish, and there's not a single boat in sight. The fishermen are gone. He asks the neighbors, and they tell him, yeah, nobody ever fishes here.
wow, blatant fraud.
Cicero defines it perfectly. When one thing is pretended, another done. Criminal fraud. And his conclusion is stark. Nothing that comes from such vice, such deception, can ever be truly expedient. It's treacherous, it's wicked. It undermines the very trust society needs. The short-term profit is an illusion compared to the damage done.
Now contrast that moral certainty with someone like Machiavelli. He's operating in a much grimmer, more pragmatic world.
Entirely focused on political survival, yes. But even Machiavelli offers a kind of warning about betrayal and consequences, though it's rooted in self-interest, not abstract virtue.
What's his observation?
He notes that a leader is fooling himself if he thinks that offering new favors will make powerful people forget old injuries.
Old wounds run deep in politics.
They rarely heal completely. And he points to the downfall of Caesar Borgia as proof. Borgia supported the election of Pope Julius II, maybe thinking this new alliance would erase their past rivalry and conflicts.
But Julius II didn't forget.
Not for a second. Machiavelli suggests Julius was driven by fear and the memory of past offenses from Borgia, and he relentlessly worked to destroy him.
So the lesson is, calculate risk based on history, not just current promises.
Exactly. Trust is fragile, and deep-seated resentment is a powerful, enduring force. In a crisis, you have to factor in that history of perceived wrongs. And this brings us right back to modern teams. That failure to address trust issues, it can be devastating.
Their sources talk about keeping quiet about trust problems until it's too late.
Yes, until there are irreversible consequences. You only find out there were trust issues after you didn't get the promotion or after the project failed.
That feels like a massive betrayal.
It is a betrayal,
Oh.
and it shatters morale, not just for the individual, but for the whole team. It creates this atmosphere where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to be vulnerable.
Which is the exact opposite of what you need in a crisis.
Precisely. You need open communication, rapid feedback. Brave leadership means having the courage to have those difficult trust conversations early, directly, before they fester and cause real damage. Avoiding them is its own kind of iniquity.
Okay, so we've talked about the external framework, reason, authority, flexible strategy, a baseline of ethical conduct, even under pressure. But none of that works if the leader's internal core isn't strong.
Right. If the leader collapses internally, the whole structure fails. So we have to look inward. And the oldest wisdom points to some fundamental inner adversaries.
Lust and wrath.
From the Bhagavad Gita, yes. Kama, lust, desire, craving and krota wrath, anger, frustration. Born from the mode of passion, rajoguna.
And these are seen as the greatest enemies.
The greatest enemies within the material world. Because they are constantly consuming, constantly pulling the mind away from its purpose, away from clarity and focus. They distort perception.
That battle sounds exhausting. It connects to what Emerson said about thinking being the hardest task.
It really does. Emerson wasn't talking about casual thought. He meant deep, sustained engagement with truth, requiring the mind to be focused without respite.
Which is incredibly difficult
Because you're constantly fighting those internal distractions. Emerson described the pull of desire, the flare of anger, the urge to just stop because it's hard work. We flinch from the rigor of it.
And truth doesn't just arrive easily.
No, Emerson says it often comes unannounced, but only after the leader has put in the effort, relentlessly laid siege to the shrine. It takes that unwavering, intentional focus, that internal discipline to overcome kama and krota and allow real insight, real strategy to emerge.
But what if that focus breaks down? Or what if the external world collapses so completely that meaning itself seems to evaporate? Frankl talks about this.
But Frankl, yes. Logotherapy. He identified the existential vacuum, that profound sense of emptiness, meaninglessness, purposelessness.
That's the why it disappears.
Exactly. Humans have this fundamental will to meaning, Frankl argued. If that's frustrated, if you can't find or make meaning in your suffering or your situation, this vacuum opens up.
And it leads to negative behaviors.
He saw it manifest, particularly in younger people, as a kind of pathological triad: depression, aggression, and addiction. These rush in to fill the void left by the absence of meaning.
So a leader needs more than just a plan. They need a deep internal sense of purpose.
A durable sense of purpose. Something strong enough to provide meaning, even when external structures are failing. Something to resist that psychological decay, that emptiness.
And that internal strength, that sense of purpose, it isn't just magically acquired. Covey talks about building it incrementally.
Through consistency, yes. His proactivity 30-day test is about making and keeping small commitments. Tiny promises to yourself.
Why small ones?
Because they build inner integrity. Each small promise kept getting up when you planned. Finishing that small task builds self-trust, self-mastery. Until, as Covey powerfully puts it, your honor becomes greater than your moods. Your commitment to your word, even just to yourself, overrides the fleeting impulse, the desire, the frustration.
That sounds like the bedrock of self-control needed to handle kama and krota.
It absolutely is. That accumulated integrity gives you the courage to take responsibility, to make hard choices, especially during a crisis, without being swayed by every internal whim or external pressure.
Now, scaling this up to an organization, how does a resilient culture handle the internal challenges, particularly failure?
Well, one key insight, especially from creative fields, is that aiming for zero failures is actually counterproductive. It's a fallacy.
The failure-free fallacy, why is it wrong?
Because in any complex, creative, or innovative endeavor, failure is inevitable. It's part of the process. If you try to eliminate it entirely, you stifle experimentation, you kill learning.
So what's the alternative? Pixar had an interesting approach.
Yeah, Creativity Inc. talks about this. Pixar's strategy wasn't to eliminate failure, but to make it less expensive. By front-loading it, they allowed directors and story teams to spend years in a relatively cheap development phase. Basically just salaries, computers, maybe some concept art.
So they can experiment and fail early.
Exactly. Iterate, try things, throw things out, fail repeatedly when the stakes are low. before committing to the massive expense of full animation production with hundreds of people. It's managing the cost of failure, not pretending failure won't happen.
That sounds smart.
Ugh.
But they learned the hard way about the human cost of pushing too hard, didn't they?
Tragically so. There's that harrowing anecdote from the production of Toy Story 2. The crunch was so intense, the hours so brutal.
What happened?
An artist, completely exhausted, driving to work after barely any sleep, forgot that he hadn't dropped his infant child off at daycare, left the baby in the back seat of the hot car.
Oh my God.
Thankfully, someone noticed. The child was rescued and was okay. It is a terrifying wake-up call.
It showed the absolute unacceptable risk of that kind of overdrive.
Exactly. Even though the employees were passionate, willing to give everything, the demands were simply too high, leading to burnout, repetitive stress injuries for a huge portion of the staff, and potentially lethal mistakes. The lesson was crystal clear. Human beings have limits. Pushing past them isn't sustainable, it isn't ethical, and ultimately it costs the organization more than it gains.
That relates to another internal barrier. We don't even perceive reality accurately most of the time.
Right. That neuroscientist who told the Pixar team that only about 40% of what we think we see actually comes from our eyes.
Only 40%. Where does the rest come from?
Memory, patterns,
Yeah.
existing mental models. Our brain instantly fills in the gaps based on past experience and expectations.
Which helps us function quickly day to day.
But it means we're constantly interpreting, assuming, filling in blanks, not necessarily seeing what's truly there. And this is a huge problem in organizations.
Because everyone shares these models.
Exactly. Collective mental models multiply the inertia. If everyone shares the same assumptions, the same blind spots, the organization becomes incredibly rigid, fundamentally unable to recognize or respond to a genuine 10x change. That strategic inflection point. We filter out the data that doesn't fit the model.
So how do you break that? Ray Dalio talks about humility.
Radical open-mindedness and humility, yes. Especially when disagreeing with others, particularly superiors or people considered more knowledgeable.
He uses the term believable people, right?
Yes, people who have a proven track record of being right in a particular domain. If you disagree with a believable person, Dalio's principle is, you must first assume you might be wrong.
Adopt the role of a student.
Sincerely try to see the issue entirely through their eyes. Understand their reasoning completely before you push your own view. The burden of proof shifts to you.
And if you still disagree after genuinely understanding them,
Then the process isn't about winning an argument. It's about stress testing your idea. You appeal to other believable people, present both viewpoints, and seek the best possible truth through this process of collective merit-based exploration. It's designed to get past ego and hierarchy to find the best answer.
that kind of open exploration requires careful communication, though, avoiding emotional triggers.
Absolutely. The Crucial Conversations research highlights a key danger sign: language using absolutes.
Words like always and never.
Exactly. When someone starts using "you always do this" or "you never listen," it's a signal that the conversation is probably heading for a train wreck.
Why?
Because it immediately escalates things. It shifts the focus from the specific issue or behavior to the person's character or fundamental competence. It forces the other person onto the defensive, shuts down listening, and ensures that even a valid point gets lost in the emotional noise.
So avoiding absolutes is crucial for keeping dialogue constructive.
Essential relational tact, especially under pressure.
And one of the toughest internal shifts for leaders, structurally, is making their executive team their primary focus.
The first team concept from the 5 dysfunctions, it's incredibly difficult psychologically.
Because you often got promoted from heading a specific department, sales, engineering, whatever.
Right. You spent years building that team. You feel loyal to them, protective of them. Shifting your primary loyalty and focus to the cross-functional executive team can feel like abandoning your people.
But it's necessary for the whole organization.
Absolutely necessary. If the leaders around the executive table prioritize their individual departmental goals over the collective goals of the entire enterprise, the organization will inevitably pull itself apart, especially during a crisis that requires unified action. Silos become fatal.
So fostering that executive team cohesion, that radical open-mindedness, it all comes back to listening.
Deeply. Covey's habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
It sounds simple, but it's hard.
It requires real vulnerability. To truly seek to understand another person's perspective, you have to be open to being changed by it. You risk having your own certainties challenged.
But the payoff is huge. There was an anecdote about that.
The executive trying to close a major deal, His counterpart was resistant, dug in.
So what did he do?
Instead of pushing his own arguments harder, he consciously decided to give the other guy psychological air. He just listened, intently. He rephrased the partner's concerns, reflected back his understanding without judgment, without rebuttal.
Until the other person felt heard.
Completely heard. The source says the partner was fighting for air, desperate to have his position acknowledged. Once that fundamental human need for validation was met, then he was ready to listen.
And the deal was
The
made.
deal was made. It proves that often the prerequisite for solving complex problems, especially under pressure, isn't just having the best technical solution. It's creating that human connection, that psychological safety, through genuine empathic listening.
That ability to create and hold that space for yourself and your team, even when everything is screaming panic, that seems like the core of resilient leadership.
Wow, we've covered a huge amount of ground here, from Aristotle's external structures for good governance,
Demanding purpose, correct rule.
all the way to that intense internal battlefield described in the Bhagavad Gita, that fight against kama and krodha, lust and wrath.
And what seems to tie it all together is that true strength, that heroic endurance needed in crisis. It's forged internally, often through difficulty. Thomas Carlyle wrote about Dante.
Saying his great work came out of long, severe sorrow and struggle.
Made him lean for years, Carlyle said. It suggests that sincerity, true effort, deep work. It's often the daughter of pain. Crisis doesn't build character. It reveals the character that was built or wasn't built during the times of relative quiet.
Carlyle also used that powerful metaphor when talking about Oliver Cromwell. A complex leader, certainly.
Deeply complex. Carlyle acknowledged Cromwell had insincerities, faults, very many faults, daily and hourly. He was human. The sun was dimmed many a time.
By circumstances, by political necessity, by the fog of war, maybe by his own flaws.
And this is the crucial distinction Carlyle makes.
But the sun had not himself grown a dimness. The core light remained. His essential character, his fundamental purpose, his sincerity, however flawed in execution. Sometimes that inner light wasn't extinguished, even when obscured.
And that leaves us with a final thought, really a question for you, the learner. When you face your crisis, your strategic inflection point, when your own sun is inevitably dimmed by pressure, failure, exhaustion,
How do you ensure that you haven't allowed that core, that fundamental purpose and integrity, to become corrupted, to become itself a source of darkness, driven by fear, ego, or that pleasure of merely being in charge?
maintaining that inner light, that commitment to reasoned purpose over personal gratification, even when things are darkest? That seems to be the essence of unyielding leadership these sources point towards.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.